Hello and welcome to Lost Love Chronicles.
Dear listeners, before we get started, drop a quick hi in the comments and let us know where you're tuning in from. Also, if you have any suggestions for us to make the channel better, please let us know. Now let's start with the story. My name's Ronald. I'm 34, and I still remember the exact moment those words came out of Jocelyn's mouth. Cold, sharp, final. Not tonight or any night. That's what she said. Just like that. The finality in her voice made my body go cold, like all the warmth had drained out of the room. We'd been married 6 years. Sure, things hadn't been perfect lately. It was a perfect marriage, but I never expected something so blunt, so final about that part of our life. Some background on me. I'm a marketing manager at a mid-sized tech company here in the Midwest. It's not some big fancy role, but it pays the bills, keeps us comfortable, and I've been climbing up steadily. I've been there for 8 years now. It's not glamorous, but it's solid, stable. I do my job, hit my targets, and bring in a steady paycheck. Jocelyn and I met back in college during our junior year. I was in business, she was in psychology. From the start, there was a kind of pull between us. We were both ambitious, both grounded. It wasn't some whirlwind drama, more like steady interest that grew stronger every week. We dated for 3 years before tying the knot. It wasn't a huge wedding, just under 80 people. Family, a few close friends. It was warm, intimate. Exactly what we wanted. Jocelyn went into HR consulting. She made decent money, had her own clients, worked flexible hours. About 4 years ago, we bought a 3-bedroom house in a quiet suburb. Decent neighborhood, friendly neighbors, room to grow into, maybe even start a family when the time felt right. But kids? We both agreed to hold off, focus on our careers, travel a bit, build something solid first. For the most part, I thought we had a good life. We both chipped in, shared chores, took 2 vacations a year, usually 1 beach trip, and 1 to visit family in different states. We had a small but tight-knit circle of other couples our age. We'd do dinners, game nights, sometimes even a weekend cabin trip. Nothing flashy, but stable, comfortable, secure. At least, that's what I believed. That evening started like any other. Nothing stood out. I got home from work after a 10-hour day, felt drained from back-to-back meetings and a client presentation that didn't land the way I'd hoped. My head was pounding from screen time and tension, and I was honestly looking forward to coming home, seeing Jocelyn, maybe ordering some Thai or pizza, putting on a movie, zoning out together like we usually did. But as soon as I stepped inside, I felt something was off. Jocelyn was sitting at the kitchen island, elbows propped up, scrolling on her phone with this tight, focused look on her face. Not angry exactly, more like absorbed, like she was somewhere else entirely. "Hey," I said, dropping my laptop bag by the door. "Long day. You good?" She looked up, gave a half smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Yeah, just reading something." I walked into the kitchen, opened the fridge, grabbed a soda. "Dinner plans, or should we order something?" "Whatever you want," she said without looking up. I leaned on the counter, studying her face. "You sure everything's okay?" "Yeah, just tired." We ended up throwing together a quick dinner, leftover pasta, I think. We sat down at the table and started talking. Mostly just the usual stuff. She told me about some drama with a new hire at her firm. Something about a manager being passive-aggressive. He emails me with smiley faces and then CCs the entire team when I make the slightest mistake, she said, stabbing at her pasta. "I swear, HR is 50% actual work and 50% babysitting egos. Sounds exhausting." I replied, chewing slowly. "God, it is." I told her about my day, how the project presentation to the client fell flat. "I don't know what it was," I said. I'd rehearsed it 3 times, but they just weren't biting. I could tell they tuned out halfway through. "We're probably going to lose that contract." She gave a distracted nod. "That sucks." And just like that, we drifted into autopilot. Talking about boring stuff, her coworkers' drama, my project deadline, the usual crap. After dinner, we moved to the living room like we always did, but even that felt hollow. I sat on the couch, flipping through channels until I landed on some random show I didn't really care about. Jocelyn curled up on the other end, her eyes locked onto her phone. I didn't have to guess what she was looking at. Probably one of those feminist Instagram accounts she'd gotten obsessed with lately. Lately, every time I glanced over, it was some carousel post about emotional labor or a meme dunking on husbands who ask their wives for affection. I tried not to let it bother me, but the distance was starting to feel like a canyon. At one point, I leaned over, just slightly, and kissed the side of her neck, like I used to do. It was a small thing, affectionate, familiar, something that always used to make her giggle or smile or lean into me. But this time, she flinched. Sharp, like I'd burned her. "Don't," she said, not even bothering to look up from her damn screen. I sat back, blinking. I was just I'm not in the mood. She cut me off. I stared at her for a moment, then tried to keep my voice level, even though my chest was tightening. You haven't been in the mood for weeks now, I said carefully. Is everything okay? That's when she finally set the phone down. Slowly, deliberately, and turned to look at me. The expression on her face wasn't angry. It wasn't even annoyed. It was cold, blank in a way I'd never seen before. Then she said it. Not tonight, or any night. I'm done with that part of our relationship. The words landed like a punch to the gut. My brain scrambled, trying to find footing, like the floor had shifted under me. I sat there, probably with my mouth hanging open, because how do you even respond to that? No explanation. No lead up. Just a brick wall dropped in the middle of our marriage. I opened my mouth, then closed it again. Finally, I got something out. What exactly do you mean? I asked, praying that I'd misunderstood. Exactly what I said, she replied calmly. Her voice had this eerie, almost clinical tone, like she was explaining basic math. I'm comfortable with our life together, the house, our social circle, the stability, but I'm no longer interested in physical intimacy with you. Or any man. I stared at her. She went on, like she'd been rehearsing this. I've been reading a lot about how women are conditioned to provide physical affection to men. And I've decided I'm not participating in that patriarchal expectation anymore. You can accept it or not. That's your choice. I just sat there numb. Yeah, I'd noticed she'd been getting deeper into that radical feminist stuff online, reposting long threads and articles with bold, sweeping generalizations about men. But I never, not in a million years, thought it would come to this, us. So, you're just unilaterally deciding that our marriage doesn't include physical intimacy anymore? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Without any discussion. I don't need your permission to set boundaries with my own body, she said flatly. Her tone had that sharp, rehearsed cadence, like she was quoting one of those Instagram posts word for word. The fact that you think this requires a discussion just shows how entitled men are to women's bodies. That one stung. I leaned back on the couch, completely stunned. Jocelyn, I said slowly, trying to meet her gaze, this isn't about entitlement. This is about our relationship. About connection and intimacy between partners who supposedly love each other. Love doesn't mean I have to perform physical acts I no longer want to participate in. Jocelyn countered, her tone as calm as if we were discussing what to have for dinner. I stared at her. When did this change? I asked, my voice low. When did you stop wanting to be with me that way? I wasn't trying to guilt her. I genuinely didn't understand. Just 2 months ago, everything had felt, if not amazing, then at least normal. She shrugged. It's been building for a while. I've just finally found the courage to vocalize it instead of performing for your benefit. Performing. That word hit like a slap. Like the last few times we were together meant nothing to her. That she was just acting, pretending, for me. That night, I couldn't bring myself to lie next to her. She didn't ask me to sleep elsewhere. But I grabbed a pillow and a blanket and made my way to the couch on my own. Not out of anger. Out of heartbreak. I lay there in the dark, staring at the ceiling fans spinning above me, and tried to make sense of everything. The woman I married, the one I thought I knew, had just shattered the foundation of what I believed we had. The next few days were strange as hell. There's no other way to put it. We still lived together, technically. We still ate dinner at the same table, sometimes even laughed at the same TV shows. From the outside, nothing looked broken. But inside, there was this giant, invisible wall between us. She acted like her announcement had been a minor adjustment, like she was letting me know we were switching grocery stores or canceling cable. Not a total redefinition of our marriage. 3 days after her announcement, I tried to bring it up again over breakfast. I'd done some research, found a therapist with strong reviews, someone who specialized in couples struggling with communication. I think we should talk to someone, I said, sliding the phone across the table with the therapist's contact info pulled up. About what's going on between us. She barely looked up from her granola. We don't need therapy, she said flatly. Jocelyn, there's nothing wrong with me. She cut in, rolling her eyes. And I'm not going to be pressured into physical intimacy I don't want just because society expects it. Her voice had that sharp tone again, the one that sounded like a soundbite from one of her online posts. Maybe you should get therapy, she added, spoon clinking against her bowl, for your dependency on female validation. I sat back, stunned. Jesus Christ. Of course she was right that no one should be pressured into anything they didn't want. I'd never do that. Never. But she wasn't even willing to talk. No openness. No compromise. Just a wall. A decision already made. And suddenly everything I said, no matter how gently I worded it, was twisted, reframed, like I was the villain for even wanting to discuss it. At night, I moved back into our bed. Not out of stubbornness, but because I refused to be exiled from my own home. She didn't protest. She just pulled the blanket up to her chin, facing the opposite wall. We didn't touch, didn't talk, just coexisted. I'd lie there, staring at the ceiling, thoughts circling like vultures. How did I not see this coming? Had I been so buried in work that I missed the signs? Or had she been hiding it all along, bottling it up until she finally snapped? I retraced our steps in my head, over and over. Yes, our sex life had slowed down over the past year, but that didn't feel abnormal. We'd been married more than 6 years. We were both working long hours. That kind of ebb and flow was supposed to be normal, right? We still had date nights. We still held hands during movies. Still whispered, "I love you" before bed. Or at least we had. Until recently. One thing became clear real fast. I was now in a marriage where I was neither wanted nor needed in any meaningful way. That realization hit me harder than I expected. I wasn't a husband anymore, not really. I was just convenient. I paid the bills, helped clean the house, attended couples' dinners and game nights so we could maintain the illusion of marital success. I was a background prop in her carefully curated narrative of growth and boundaries. Worse, I was now the token example she could point to whenever she needed to vent to her new online friends. Just another clueless, entitled man she was bravely setting boundaries against. Still, despite everything, I tried. One last time. It was a Saturday morning. The sun hadn't fully broken through the clouds, and the house had that quiet, lazy feel it always did on weekends. She was standing by the Keurig, scrolling through her phone again, probably already knee-deep in another post about emotional labor or how men weaponize competence. I took a deep breath and approached gently. "Jocelyn," I said, voice calm, hands open, "I'm trying to respect your feelings. I really am. But I need to understand better what's happening. Did I do something wrong? Is there something I can change?" She let out a sigh so theatrical it could have won an award. She rolled her eyes and shook her head slightly, like I'd asked the dumbest question in the world. "This is exactly the problem with men," she said, her voice laced with contempt. "You think everything is about you." "I'm not trying to make it about me," I said, confused. "I'm just trying to figure out how we got here." "This is about my journey," she snapped. "My autonomy. The fact that you're making it about what you did wrong just proves my point." My chest tightened. I tried to hold it together. "But we're married," I said, my voice low but firm. "Your decisions affect me, too." She crossed her arms and narrowed her eyes. "So what? You think your entitlement to my body outweighs my right to control it?" I blinked, stunned. "That's not what I'm saying at all. This is why the patriarchy persists," she said, like she was on a stage. "Because men like you can't handle women making their own choices." That was it. I couldn't take any more. I walked away, not because I was angry, but because I felt completely hopeless. There was no reasoning with her. No conversation, no bridge, no common ground. She'd created a worldview where anything I said, no matter how gentle or respectful, only confirmed her belief that I was the problem. 2 weeks after her declaration, I found myself sitting in my car outside our house. Just sitting there, engine off, hands on the wheel. I couldn't bring myself to go inside. What was waiting for me? Another evening of fake smiles and silent meals? Another lecture about how I was complicit in some system just for wanting closeness with my wife? That's when it hit me. I had a choice. I could keep living in this emotional desert, hoping for rain that was never going to come. Or I could start redirecting my time, attention, and energy towards something that gave me even the possibility of growth. And as I finally opened the car door and stepped inside, something shifted. No, it wasn't revenge. Not some explosive confrontation. At least not yet. It was something quieter, something stronger. A redirection of my life's energy. If Jocelyn had emotionally moved on without physically leaving, maybe I could do the same. It started small. I set my alarm for 5:30 a.m., a full hour before she'd wake up. Those quiet mornings quickly became sacred to me. Peaceful. There were no arguments. No glares. No passive-aggressive comments. Just silence. My own space. I began with 20 minutes of meditation. Something I'd always rolled my eyes at, telling myself I didn't have time for that nonsense. But now I had time. And to my surprise, that brief stillness each morning began to clear the fog from my mind. The constant mental noise, the spiraling thoughts about my failing marriage. Next came physical exercise. Nothing dramatic. I wasn't trying to become some shredded Instagram model. Just push-ups, sit-ups, a few stretches, and a short run around the neighborhood to get my blood moving. I kept it simple. Intentional. By the time Jocelyn emerged from our bedroom around 7 a.m., I was already back. Showered. Dressed. Coffee in hand. Sitting at the kitchen table reading something, anything, to give my mind something real to hold on to. On the third day, she finally said something. "You're up early," she commented, walking past me toward the fridge. There was a slight annoyance in her voice. Not overt. Just there. She was used to having the mornings to herself. To dominate the kitchen with her presence, her podcasts, her size. I didn't look up from my book. Just making some changes, I said casually. She stood there a second longer than necessary, like she was waiting for me to elaborate. I didn't. She didn't ask for more. Just muttered something under her breath. Something about toxic masculinity and exercise culture, and poured herself almond milk like the conversation never happened. I pretended not to hear. The second week, I took it a step further and joined a gym near my office. A small one. Nothing fancy. Just iron, sweat, and a place to clear my head. Instead of rushing home after work to the suffocating quiet of our house, I took my time. 1 hour of lifting weights, pushing my limits. 1 hour where no one was correcting my thoughts or telling me my presence was oppressive. Each rep burned off a layer of resentment. Each drop of sweat flushed out the self-pity. And somewhere in the middle of that process, I started picturing a future. One where Jocelyn wasn't the center of my universe anymore. One where I got to decide what mattered. I also started reconnecting with a few old friends, guys I'd lost touch with during the marriage. Not because I'd wanted to, but because Jocelyn never liked them. They're too masculine, she once said. Problematic. Translation: they didn't worship the ground she walked on or filter their speech like a diversity seminar. It wasn't anything dramatic. Just casual lunches. Coffee after work. I didn't vent or ask for advice. I didn't badmouth her. That wasn't the point. The point was to remember who I was before I became the punching bag of someone else's ideological awakening. And what surprised me? How many of them were going through something similar? Not identical, no, but familiar. A pattern. Caleb, a buddy from work, 36, solid guy, was dealing with a girlfriend who suddenly decided his gaming hobby was problematic. 3 years together, and now she had a problem with the thing that helped him decompress. Martin, my old college roommate, told me how he couldn't post a damn photo or article on social media without his wife jumping into the comments to correct him publicly. Like she was his moral editor. Like she needed to teach him a lesson in front of an audience. It's like they want us to be both mind readers and punching bags, Caleb said during one of our lunches. You can't win. That phrase stuck with me. You can't win. Not if you keep playing by rules that change on a whim. Rules you didn't agree to. Rules you never even saw being written. So maybe the answer wasn't to play better. Maybe it was to stop playing their game entirely and start building mine. I opened a separate savings account. Quietly. In my name only. An account Jocelyn couldn't access. Nothing dramatic. I didn't want to trigger any fights or disrupt the household balance. I kept contributing to all our joint expenses like always. But I began quietly redirecting my discretionary spending. That Costa Rica trip Jocelyn had been hinting at for our anniversary, the one centered around some women's empowerment retreat? Yeah, I passed on that. Smiled when she brought it up, nodded vaguely. But that money? It went straight into a high-yield investment account. In my name only. If nothing else, it gave me a sense of control. In a situation where I felt increasingly powerless, that little nest egg was mine. Quiet. Safe. Separate. About a month into this redirection, I caught a glimpse of myself in the mirror one morning and had to pause. I barely recognized the man staring back. The daily workouts had started reshaping my body, shoulders broader, stomach flattening out. My posture had improved too. The slouch I hadn't even noticed I'd adopted was gone. And the tight knot that had lived at the base of my neck for months? It was finally starting to loosen. But it was the change in my eyes that struck me most. There was a sharpness there. Focus. A flicker of energy I hadn't seen since before Jocelyn's announcement. Maybe even before the slow erosion began. I updated my wardrobe next. Nothing loud or flashy. Just simple, well-fitted clothes that worked with my improving frame and didn't make me look like I was clinging to my 20s. Confidence, not desperation. When I wore a new button-down to a dinner party with friends, the compliments came almost immediately. You've lost weight, haven't you? Megan asked, eyeing me with a smile as we sat down to eat. Just been taking better care of myself, I said, returning the smile with ease. Jocelyn noticed too. Of course she did. She tried to bury it under criticism, like always. Isn't that shirt a little tight? She asked one morning while I was buttoning it up before work. Seems like you're trying way too hard. Very midlife crisis energy. I didn't take the bait. I just smiled, grabbed my keys, and walked out without saying a word. That silence. It seemed to annoy her even more. The redirection didn't stop with my body and wardrobe. It spilled into my finances, too. Jocelyn and I had always maintained separate accounts alongside a shared one for bills and household expenses. That setup hadn't changed. I still contributed my share, without fail. But the extras, the trips, the luxury gifts, the small indulgences that used to flow freely into shared experiences, those funds were redirected. Instead of Costa Rica, I invested in something that had once brought me real joy: photography. It was a passion I'd shelved years ago, mostly because Jocelyn had complained it took too much time away from us. Ironic, now, considering how little of us remained. I signed up for a weekend workshop. Nothing huge, just enough to dust off the basics and immerse myself again. I bought a decent DSLR camera and a couple of good lenses, quality gear, not over the top. Soon, I was out hiking at dawn on Saturdays, chasing golden hour light and capturing landscapes before the world was even fully awake. Those early morning excursions became their own kind of meditation. Framing a shot, adjusting the focus, watching the light shift across the mountains or frost glisten on fallen leaves. It was the only time I truly forgot about everything else. I wasn't a husband. I wasn't a problem. I wasn't being judged or corrected or shamed. I was just there, present. I started watching tutorials, studying composition, practicing relentlessly. My first few shots were clumsy, flat, but I improved quickly. Before long, I had images I was actually proud of. A jagged mountain range drenched in orange light. Close-ups of frost patterns so intricate they looked like lace. Thunderclouds rolling over a golden field like something out of a movie. I began posting my photos online, connecting with other photographers, slowly building a small following. Some of my shots even sold as prints through an online marketplace. Not life-changing money, but enough to feed my new passion. Every dollar from those sales went straight into that private account. Then, one Saturday morning, as I came in from a sunrise shoot, camera bag slung over my shoulder, Jocelyn looked up from her coffee. "Where have you been going so early on Saturdays?" she asked, narrowing her eyes. It was the first time she'd acknowledged several weeks of my new routine. The entitlement in her voice was crystal clear. Jocelyn wasn't used to me having a life outside of her orbit. She was used to me being available, physically, emotionally, logistically, whenever she wanted. Taking photographs, I answered simply, brushing some dirt off my jacket as I set my camera bag down. She tilted her head slightly, arms folded. "Since when are you into photography?" The tone wasn't curious. It was accusatory, like I needed permission to have hobbies now. "I've always been into it," I replied evenly. "Just haven't had the time to pursue it until now." Her lips pressed together. Her expression flickered, some mix of confusion, irritation, and something else she tried to hide. Interest, maybe, but she didn't press. She stood there a few seconds longer, then turned back to her mug. "Well," she said over her shoulder, "I needed help with some things around the house last weekend, but you were nowhere to be found." Of course, not a question about what I'd been doing, not a moment of shared curiosity, just a complaint that I hadn't been present for her. I stayed calm. "You could have texted," I said, pouring myself some water. "Phone works even in the mountains." Her voice rose. "I shouldn't have to text my own husband to get basic help." I met her gaze and gave a small shrug. Things change. Those two words landed heavy in the space between us. I saw it then, just for a moment, something flicker across her face. The first crack in the armor. A glimmer of realization that maybe her declaration had consequences she hadn't accounted for. At work, meanwhile, everything was gaining momentum. The fog that had followed me for months was gone. My focus sharpened. My confidence returned. I wasn't just getting by, I was excelling. Ryan, my boss, mid-40s, sharp guy, no time for fluff, pulled me aside after a big pitch I'd nailed. "Whatever you're doing, keep it up," he said, clapping me on the back. "You're on fire lately." The words hit deeper than he knew. After months of being treated like an afterthought at home, that simple recognition meant something. Not everything, but enough to propel me forward. I started volunteering for projects that required travel. In the past, I'd avoided those. Turned down conferences and client trips to be home more with Jocelyn. But now, I welcome the distance. A 3-day conference in Chicago. A week-long training in Denver. A quick client meeting in Boston. Each trip gave me space to breathe. Hotel rooms where I could sprawl out without passive-aggressive comments about clutter. Meals where no one criticized my food choices. Conversations with colleagues who didn't twist every word through some ideological filter. Denver was the standout. While I was there, I met up with Travis, an old college friend who'd moved west years ago. We hiked one morning in the Rockies, the light perfect, clouds rolling in just enough to add drama to the horizon. I took some of my best shots that day. When I posted them online later that week, my follower count spiked. Within days, I'd sold 3 prints. Travis and I sat at a scenic overlook that afternoon, catching our breath. He looked over at me. "You know, you could actually turn this into a serious side business," he said. "Your eye for composition is really good." His words stayed with me. Not just flattery, he meant it. What if photography wasn't just a distraction? What if it could be something more? A path forward. A door to a different version of my life. One that didn't revolve around someone else's constant disapproval. 3 months into my redirection, everything else was improving. I was sleeping better, looking better, performing better, at work, with friends, and how I carried myself. Everything, except for my marriage. That remained exactly what it had become, an empty shell of formal interactions and parallel existences. The irony wasn't lost on me. In withdrawing her affection, Jocelyn had unintentionally pushed me to become a stronger, more focused version of myself. Leaner, sharper, more grounded. It was like the universe's twisted way of compensating. Take one thing, give another. What Jocelyn didn't know, and I had no plans of telling her, was that I'd opened a separate checking account and started routing 50% of my paycheck there. That included performance bonuses. The other half, more than enough to cover my share of our joint obligations. The mortgage, utilities, groceries. But the new account? That was my escape fund, dollar by dollar. Not because I was planning to leave just yet. I wasn't. I wanted to see where this road went first. But I'd be damned if I let myself get blindsided again. One evening, as I was lacing my boots and grabbing my camera bag for a photography meetup, Jocelyn spoke up. Are you seeing someone else? I froze for a second, hand on the doorknob. The tone, God, the tone. Like she was entitled to know. Like she still had a claim on my heart, my time, my energy, after stripping away every form of affection. I turned slowly, looked her in the eyes. No, I said truthfully. Why would you ask that? She shrugged, but her voice carried something odd. Not anger exactly. Not jealousy. Something quieter. You've changed, she said. You're hardly ever home anymore. I nearly laughed at the hypocrisy. I'm just redirecting my time and energy into things that fulfill me, I said, echoing her clinical tone back to her. Isn't that what you've been doing? She bristled. That's different, she snapped. Is it? I asked calmly. You made a personal choice about your body and autonomy. I grabbed my keys. And I'm making personal choices about how I spend my time and interests. Seems perfectly fair to me. So, you're what? Punishing me? Her voice cracked just slightly, rising. Not at all, I said, already opening the door. I'm adapting to our new reality. You set a boundary, and I respect that. I'm simply setting boundaries of my own. She had no response to that. I didn't wait for one. Driving to meet the photography group, I felt something click into place. For the first time since her cold declaration, I wasn't holding my breath. I wasn't hoping for her to change her mind or soften. I was too busy building something new. A life that no longer centered around her approval or affection. That night we met at a local park to practice long exposure and night photography. Street lamps, stars, moonlight, capturing stillness in the dark. Among the group was a guy named Dylan, mid-30s, worked for a local magazine. He leaned over to check the display on my camera. These are really good, he said, scrolling through the frames. We're always looking for local talent for our nature section. Would you be interested in submitting some work? Just like that, another door opened. Unexpected, but real, tangible. By the time I got home, Jocelyn was already in bed, probably fuming that I wasn't there to listen to another diatribe about how her coworkers didn't respect her boundaries or how she was surrounded by misogynists. But I didn't care. I had bigger things on my mind. 6 months into my redirection, the pivotal moment arrived during a company retreat. We'd gathered at a lakeside resort for a weekend of team building and strategic planning. The kind of thing I used to find awkward, but now welcomed. That night, after a long day of meetings, our team circled around a fire pit. Stars overhead, laughter and snacks passed around. And then Elise, one of my newer colleagues, 29, joined the department 3 months earlier, sat down beside me. Elise was, in every imaginable way, the opposite of Jocelyn. Warm, supportive, present. She wasn't performing interest. She was genuinely curious about other people's lives. And more importantly, she listened. We sat around the fire pit, the glow casting soft shadows across her face. She leaned in slightly, voice low enough that only I could hear. You know, when I first started, everyone told me how lucky I was to be working with you. That caught me off guard. I turned toward her. Really? Why's that? She smiled, a quiet kind of smile, almost shy. They said you'd completely transformed the department's performance. But they also mentioned how much you've changed personally over the past few months. I raised an eyebrow. Changed how? She hesitated, then looked at me with soft curiosity. They said you used to be kind of withdrawn, almost sad. That doesn't match the person I've known at all. I looked into the fire, watching the embers crackle. She wasn't wrong. Let's just say I went through some personal challenges, I said, keeping my voice measured. Eventually, I realized the only thing I could really control was myself, my time, my energy, my mindset. So I made some changes. She nodded thoughtfully. Well, whatever you did, it worked. You seem completely in your element now. As the night went on, I felt myself relax in a way I hadn't in a very long time. Elise was intelligent, insightful, and had a dry, unexpected sense of humor that caught me off guard more than once. We talked about hiking, photography, the weird quirks of corporate retreats. I found myself smiling. Not the polite kind I'd perfected over years of forced social dinners, but real, effortless. When I mentioned my interest in landscape photography, her eyes lit up. "Show me," she said, nudging my arm. I pulled out my phone and opened the gallery. She leaned in, close enough that I could smell the faint trace of citrus in her shampoo. "These are amazing," she said, swiping through. "You've got a real talent." "Thanks," I said, suddenly a little self-conscious. "I've started selling some prints online. A local magazine might run a few too." "That's fantastic," she said, looking up with sincere admiration. "I'd love to see more of your work sometime." Her smile lingered. And just like that, I felt it, an unfamiliar flutter in my chest. The kind that had been absent from my life for so long I'd forgotten what it felt like. The warmth of her shoulder brushing mine sent a jolt through my body. It wasn't dramatic, just a brief, subtle moment, but it hit harder than I expected. A stark reminder of how long it had been since I'd experienced any kind of closeness. I shifted slightly, just enough to create space, trying to steady myself. Because regardless of the state of my marriage, I wasn't going to cross that line, not yet. Later, as the group began to drift off toward their cabins, Elise walked beside me down the path. "Some of us are planning a sunrise hike tomorrow before the meetings start," she said, hands tucked in her jacket pockets. "You should join. Perfect lighting for those landscape shots you love." I smiled. "Yeah, count me in." The next morning, as dawn broke, I stood on a ridge with Elise and 2 other colleagues. The sky ignited in brilliant oranges and soft pinks. I took dozens of shots, wide landscapes, cloud patterns, treetops glowing in the early light. But over and over, my lens kept finding its way back to Elise's profile as she gazed at the horizon. Her silhouette framed by the rising sun. There was a calmness in her presence. Something grounding. Genuine interest, mutual respect, actual conversation instead of ideological monologues. Elise represented everything I'd been missing. But I also knew, without question, that I needed to resolve my situation with Jocelyn before even considering anything else. When I got back home Sunday evening, the first thing that hit me was the smell of garlic and rosemary. Jocelyn was in the kitchen, humming softly as she stirred something on the stove. That alone made me pause. She hadn't cooked for us in months. The timing? Suspicious as hell. "How was the retreat?" she asked, barely glancing over her shoulder. Her tone was light, almost pleasant. "Productive?" I set my bag down by the door, still wary. "Yeah, we finalized the strategic plan for next quarter." She nodded, like she cared, and then added, "I saw some of the photos you posted. Beautiful location." "It was," I said, watching her a little too closely now, wondering where all this sudden interest was coming from. She turned toward me slightly, wooden spoon still in hand. "That woman in some of the pictures. Is she on your team?" The question landed with an unexpected weight. I hadn't realized Elise had featured so prominently in the shots I'd uploaded, mostly group photos, nothing inappropriate. But she had been in a few. "That's Elise," I replied neutrally, keeping my tone steady. "Our new marketing specialist." "She's very pretty," Jocelyn said, her eyes locking onto mine. There was an edge beneath the words, a territorial note I hadn't heard in a long time. It was rich, coming from someone who had rejected me so completely. I hadn't really noticed. I lied, feeling strangely defensive. "Really?" she countered. "You've taken about a dozen photos with her in them. Seems like you noticed plenty." The accusatory tone was unmistakable. I took a breath and chose my words carefully. "She happened to be in the frame during our group activities," I said. "Why are you asking about this?" She didn't answer right away, just stirred the sauce a little too aggressively. "You made it very clear," I continued, "that certain aspects of our relationship are over. You don't get to dictate who I spend time with professionally." Her jaw tensed. She turned back to the stove. "Just curious about your colleagues, that's all," she muttered. "I have a right to know who my husband spends time with." That was the moment it clicked. The last bit of illusion cracked and fell away. I was done. Whatever flickers of confusion or guilt I'd held on to gone. Her expectations were still completely one-sided. She had stripped the marriage of intimacy and affection, but still wanted the loyalty, the exclusivity, the control. That night, I lay in bed wide awake while she scrolled on her phone next to me. A different kind of silence hung between us. No longer the Cold War of months past. This was quieter, tighter. Like 2 people waiting to see who would move first. The following week brought more surprises. Jocelyn started initiating conversations. "How was your meeting today?" she'd ask while handing me coffee like we were back in year 2 of our marriage. She suggested we watch a series together. Made dinner more than once. No ideological rants. No lectures. Just small talk and polite interest. It was eerie. It felt like she'd resurrected the version of herself I'd married years ago, before everything had calcified. But I wasn't fooled. I knew what was happening. She sensed I was drifting. And now she was trying to reassert control, to pull me back into orbit. I could see it in the way her eyes lingered too long on my face. In the way she laughed at things she used to mock. It didn't tempt me. It confirmed everything. This wasn't about revenge. This was about self-preservation. And then, just like that, two things happened. First, I got the promotion. A big one. More responsibility, better title, substantial raise. The kind of raise that could quietly fast-track my exit plan. I didn't tell Jocelyn. Not even a word. Despite her sudden efforts to reconnect, I kept it to myself. Every attempt she made felt rehearsed, performative, like a calculated move to regain position. And second, I found out through a contact in my professional network that Jocelyn's company was in trouble. A merger was underway. Rumors of sweeping cuts. Her department was on the chopping block. It wasn't insider trading or anything illegal, just the kind of information that moves quietly through local business circles. Her company was planning these layoffs. In fact, just 3 weeks earlier, I'd helped a colleague's spouse get hired at a competing firm, someone with Jocelyn's exact background and qualifications. It had taken one call, a quick recommendation, a resume forwarded to the right inbox. That's all it took. I could have done the same for her, but I didn't. That silent decision, to not lift a finger, was when I knew I had crossed into a new phase. I was no longer invested in her outcomes. Instead, I accelerated my exit strategy. I consulted a lawyer discreetly, paying in cash from my private account. Nothing traceable, nothing she could sniff out. I wanted to know exactly how to protect myself financially, how to avoid getting blindsided in a divorce. The attorney was thorough. He asked questions. I answered carefully, and I documented everything. Jocelyn's declaration about ending physical intimacy, her tone, her refusal to discuss it, her indifference to how it affected me, her sudden territorial jealousy after months of disconnection, her behavior, cold, dismissive, sometimes mocking, everything that might help my case. But what sealed it, what locked everything into place, was what I learned from a few casual conversations with mutual acquaintances. Jocelyn had been bad-mouthing me, to her friends, her sister, even one of her old college roommates who ran into me at a networking event. She'd painted herself as some kind of feminist martyr, trapped in a marriage with a clueless patriarchal man-child. Of course, she conveniently left out the part where she had unilaterally ended all physical and emotional intimacy and expected everything else, financial security, companionship, shared routines, to continue uninterrupted. That was it for me. No more half measures. No more waiting. 2 weeks later, the layoffs were officially announced. She came home visibly shaken. Her face pale, posture slouched. My department might be cut next month, she said. The vulnerability in her voice was calculated. Familiar. I'm really worried. I kept my expression neutral. That's tough, I said, not unkindly. I'm sure you'll figure it out. Her eyes searched my face for more, comfort, reassurance, something. I offered nothing. The layoffs happened faster than anyone expected. That Friday, she came home sobbing. I lost my job, she said between hiccups. They eliminated our entire department. I looked up from my laptop. I'm sorry to hear that. She stared at me, waiting. What's your plan? I asked. Her mouth dropped open. My plan? She repeated. I just lost my job. I need time to process this. Of course, I said, nodding. Take all the time you need. But our financial obligations don't stop. So just let me know how you plan to continue contributing to the household expenses. She looked like I'd slapped her. Are you serious right now? I'm in crisis, and you're asking about bills. I shrugged slightly. Just being practical. We both contribute equally, right? That's always been your position. She didn't respond. She just stormed off into the bedroom. The next morning, I made my move. While she was in the shower, I transferred every cent from our joint account into my private one, leaving just enough to avoid triggering overdraft fees. Nothing illegal. Nothing hidden. Just protective. Then I packed a bag. Essentials. Documents. Camera gear. A few keepsakes. I wasn't going to drag this out. When she walked into the living room, towel wrapped around her hair, I was sitting on the couch. She froze when she saw the manila envelope. What's this? She asked, her voice cautious. Divorce papers, I replied calmly. Her face went blank, then registered the words like a delayed punch. I've realized I deserve better than a one-sided marriage, I said, keeping my voice steady. A marriage with someone who unilaterally changed the terms of our relationship without discussion or compromise. Shock, anger, disbelief. It moved across her face in real time. You can't be serious, she said. Because I wouldn't sleep with you? That's what this is about. No, I said, my tone even. It's about respect. And reciprocity. I met her eyes, and this time I didn't look away. You made a choice that affected both of us, presented it as non-negotiable, and expected me to simply accept it. That's not a partnership. I said flatly. She scoffed, folding her arms. So, you're running off with your little work girlfriend? How predictable. I didn't flinch. This has nothing to do with Elise. Or anyone else, for that matter. This is about you and me, and the broken agreement between us. I watched her expression shift the moment I added, by the way, I've moved our joint funds into a separate account. You won't have access to it until we reach a settlement. Her face went pale like the blood had drained out all at once. You did what? She gasped. You can't do that. I just lost my job. How am I supposed to pay for anything? Not my problem, I replied, matching the cold, dismissive tone she'd used the night she said, not tonight or any night. I let the silence sit for a moment, then added, you should have considered the potential consequences before making unilateral decisions about our marriage. This is financial abuse, she shouted, her voice cracking as tears started forming in her eyes. I need that money, for basic necessities. No, I said calmly. This is consequences. I walked over to the kitchen counter, grabbed the folder with the documents my lawyer had prepared, and held it up. And speaking of necessities, the mortgage is due next week. I've calculated your half. It's listed in here. I'll expect your payment on time. She blinked at me, stunned. Please, you can't do this, she said, her voice breaking now. I have no income. I need time to find a new job. I raised an eyebrow. You should have thought about that before declaring, not tonight or any night, and treating me like some accessory to your life instead of a partner. She opened her mouth, but I cut her off. You wanted independence from patriarchal expectations, I said. Congratulations. You've got it. Complete financial independence too. What followed over the next week was like watching someone unravel. The feminist slogans disappeared overnight. Gone were the cold lectures and ideological diatribes. In their place came desperate bargaining. She suggested counseling. Now, after months of refusing even a conversation, she hinted she might be open to reconsidering her stance on intimacy. One night, she even tried seduction, wearing lingerie she hadn't touched in over a year and lighting candles like nothing had happened. I walked out of the bedroom without a word. My lawyer had been very clear. Don't leave the house yet, but don't give her anything that could be twisted. The tension in the house was suffocating. Then came the outside voices. Her friends started calling me, demanding, shaming, guilt-tripping. You're being cruel, they said. She needs your support now more than ever. I blocked every number, one by one. Then her parents reached out. Her mother left a voicemail I didn't listen to. Her father managed to reach me. Can we meet? Just the four of us? He asked. Talk things out. I was respectful, calm, polite. With all due respect, I told him, your daughter made her choice months ago. I'm just making mine now. 2 weeks into the standoff, the facade cracked completely. She came to me one evening, eyes red, face puffy. I was reading on the couch. She didn't even pretend to be composed. Please, she whispered. I need help. Her voice trembled. I can't do this alone. I set my book down and looked at her, really looked at her, for the first time in a while. Her strength was gone. Her edge dulled. That's an interesting perspective, I said. Wasn't it you who told me that women don't need men? That marriage is just a patriarchal construct? That physical intimacy with me was something you could unilaterally end without discussion. Her shoulders sagged. I was wrong, she whispered. I got caught up in all these ideas, without thinking about what they really meant. Please, she whispered, eyes rimmed red, voice raw. I'll do anything. We can go to counseling, rebuild our relationship, whatever you want. I stood still for a moment, letting the silence settle between us. The problem is, Jocelyn, I said quietly but firmly, I don't want that anymore. Her face fell, disbelief washing over her like a wave. You showed me who you really are, I continued. Someone who views relationships as transactional, who takes what she wants and discards the rest. Now that you need something from me, suddenly you're willing to reconsider everything. That's not love. That's not partnership. That's opportunism. I stood up and grabbed my keys from the counter. I'm moving out tomorrow, I told her, meeting her eyes. The divorce papers are ready for your signature. If you contest them, I'm prepared for a legal battle that'll drain what little resources you have left. If you sign them as is, I'll provide a one-time payment to help you transition to your new independent life. Her mouth opened slightly, the realization hitting her all at once. You planned this all along, she said, her voice hollow. From the moment I said those words, you were planning your exit. No, I said, shaking my head slowly. I planned this from the moment I realized you saw me as disposable. I stepped toward the door, pausing for just a second. You taught me an important lesson about self-worth, Jocelyn. And for that, I let the pause speak for itself. I suppose I should thank you. The next day, I moved into the apartment I'd quietly secured weeks earlier. She signed the papers without a fight and received the settlement as promised. Later, Through mutual acquaintances, I learned she'd moved back in with her parents, feminist ideology seemingly shelved in favor of practical necessity. As for me, I kept moving forward. I advanced in my career. I built my photography business steadily on the side. I maintained my physical fitness, kept my routines sharp. And yes, in time, I started a genuine relationship with Elise, a relationship built on mutual respect, support, laughter, and trust. The kind of partnership I'd always wanted but never truly had. 6 months after the divorce was finalized, my first photography exhibition opened at a local gallery. Among the pieces was a landscape I had taken at dawn during that company retreat. The morning everything finally clicked. The morning I realized I deserved better. The greatest revenge? It wasn't financial. It wasn't about dignity or payback. It was becoming the man I should have been all along, confident, self-sufficient, and unwilling to settle for anything less than a reciprocal relationship. In trying to diminish me, Jocelyn had inadvertently set me free. Occasionally, she still tries to contact me, especially when money is tight. I respond only when necessary, keeping it professional and brief. No emotion, no engagement. Some of our old mutual friends, once filled with judgment, eventually heard the full story. A few said I was harsh, but I never cared about their opinion. Because here's the truth about consequences, they aren't harsh. They aren't kind. They're just inevitable. Jocelyn tore down the foundation of our marriage, yet expected the structure to stay standing. When it collapsed, she wasn't the victim of cruelty. She was experiencing the natural result of her own decisions. This whole experience taught me something unshakable. Self-respect isn't selfish. It's essential. Sometimes the most powerful response to someone who treats you as disposable is to simply agree with them and walk away. Not in anger, not in spite, but with calm, quiet certainty that you deserve more than they're willing to give. So, if you're hearing this and recognizing your own situation in my story, know this. You have choices. You don't have to accept unilateral changes to your relationship. You don't have to shrink yourself to fit someone else's ideology. And you absolutely don't have to wait for permission to start living a life that actually fulfills you. Because the person who tries to change the rules without your input, they're telling you exactly how much they value your voice in the relationship. Listen to what they're really saying, not just with their words, but with their actions. Dear listeners, please share your thoughts in the comments section below and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.